And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government. Now, before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. To do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. This program is being brought to you live on Thursday morning, October 2nd, 2014. It is now 6:31 a.m. Central Time. Well, good morning, everyone. During our live broadcast, we invite you to call toll-free 888-773-4496. Send us your emails to comments at libertytalkradio.com. I encourage you to get educated on economic issues. Go to Andy Sutton's website. That's Sutton, SUTTON-associates.net. In his monthly newsletters and podcasts, Andy discusses economic issues and how they affect you. The reason why I promote Andy Sutton's website is because I know him. He's an economist from Pennsylvania, and he doesn't sell anything, but he does help you out, and he will give you guidance, and you can call him and become a client of his. He's very helpful, and he's a very smart guy, and he understands what's going on. He's not following the herd. Also, I suggest that you read briefs by Paul Jacobs, Common Sense. Just go to thisiscommonsense.com and you'll get a daily readout of what's going on. Hold on. Just let me... Oop, I had to adjust the camera a little bit, I guess. I'm not sure what I'm doing here by myself this morning. Well, good morning, everyone. Today, I want to discuss a couple of issues. You know, we're going to have Jim Mosquera with us this morning, and I'll give you a full introduction. He's the author of Escaping Oz. It's about the economy, and he really gives a good inflection as to what is going on financially. What's interesting is he was, I think, a mechanical engineer, and he got so enthralled with the economy, he sort of left that, and he went and he started Sentinel Financial, just because he got to understand the economy, I guess, better than anybody else. So, and he wrote a book on it, and he's very interesting. So I'm looking forward to the second part of the program. But the first part of the program, I want to mention a couple of things. I have to admit that I'm a little groggy this morning. I had a little difficulty in getting myself started this morning. I had that open heart surgery, and I had on all sorts of medication, which keeps me up at night, unfortunately. And as a result, I wake up groggy, and I can't seem to focus very well. In another month, most of this will be all over, so I just can't wait, because it's just wearing me out. It's going to wear me out before I make it, I think. But I wanted to mention a few things. You know, I just have a difficult time thinking as everyone else does, and I often wonder how that happened. And I'd like to tell you a couple little stories. They're true. And troubled times in my life almost, and one was troubled times, but another one was just an incident. I was a pack master in the Cub Scouts, and we had this jamboree of which our troop had to have a booth and promote the booth. And one of the promotions was tactics that we used to promote the booth was to have one of the Cub Scouts in uniform walk up and down the length of the booth with a bell espousing liberty, which I think was kind of neat. It ties into this program, but I mean, that's just by coincidence. And the bell didn't work. Well, I took the bell apart, and I just couldn't fix it. Now, there was a fellow there who was brilliant. He was the guy that this is the old days, by the way. This is before PCs and all that. This is the onset of the computer age. He would spend 3 months in Switzerland on a mountaintop writing the code to make the computers, IBM computers, work. I mean, he was brilliant. He had, before computers were even known, were even popular, even people's houses, his basement, looked like a science laboratory. Brilliant. And everyone in his family was brilliant. His father was a brain surgeon. His brother was a high-end dentist. Everyone was just up there, intellectually. And he sat down with that bell and he looked at it. He didn't do anything. He just looked at it. And I'm thinking to myself, why don't you fix the friggin' bell? We need the bell for the kid, And he just stood there. Well, I allowed him the luxury of looking at the bell. And what he did is he turned everything upside down and he fixed it very easily. And he walked away and he gave it to the kid. Didn't ask for thanks, didn't say, look how wonderful I am, just turned everything upside down. I never forget that. And he fixed the bell. And I realized then that I was looking at things the wrong way. I was looking at things the way everyone else was looking at them, and we weren't solving any of our problems. I brought that with me. I used to work for a fully integrated oil company. Now, anyone who works for an oil company knows how much trouble you can get in if you go against the tide. The big corporations are bureaucracies. And in bureaucracies, your boss is always right. My son called me one time. He was just starting out with a new large company out in Colorado. And he was being kind of wisey on me. And he says, well, you know everything. He said, tell me, how do I get ahead of a large corporation? I said, well, I'm glad you asked me an easy question. And I said, take a pad out and a piece of paper or whatever and write this down and memorize it and say it to yourself every 5 seconds. Make sure you get it embedded in your mind. He says, okay, here I go, And he was kind of like being nasty and like, oh, I got to listen to this guy, And I said, here, 5 words. Make your boss look good. And he got all upset with me, and he said, well, that's just, I asked you a serious question. Why give me this answer, make your boss? I said, because you work for a bureaucracy, not a company. And he said, well, what if my boss burns the building down? Well, you go, boss, never seen anyone use a blowtorch like that before. You got to teach me. That was phenomenal. You always support your boss because you see what happens when they go to meetings. They say, who do you think will be eligible for this particular job? You think they really look at what the person's attributes are, what their education is, and what reports they wrote, and how good they are, or how? No, they don't. They said, which one is one of us? Which one will fit into the mold, this bureaucracy that we have? They don't say bureaucracy. Which one would I support? Which one would support me? So they pick out the person who says, greatest blowtorch user I've ever seen in my life. That's the guy they picked. So he grumbled a lot, but I think he learned something by it. There's a lot of truth to that. Unfortunately, there's a heck of a lot of truth in that. Now, the reason why I bring bureaucracies up is because we have 2 bureaucracies that we don't consider bureaucracies. And bureaucracies are the worst thing, the most unproductive, harmful entities known to mankind. There are no worse in the world. All right? And there are 2. Our government has become a bureaucracy, and our military has become a bureaucracy. And this is what they have in common, which is a real problem. A real problem, and basically at the very core of the problems that we're experiencing in the United States. As you know, if you're in Washington, you do as your boss wants you to do. You manipulate, you alter, you may even falsify. All these things are done to make sure that what your boss wants done, whether it's right or wrong. Because the only way that you're going to maintain your job and, of course, get promoted is that if you do what your boss tells you to do. You got to make your boss look good. Now, if you're an opposing party and stuff like that, you may say a few words, but that's all showmanship. That doesn't mean anything. And you see, what happens in bureaucracies, as happens in large corporations, the worst get promoted. The free thinkers, the people who want to put things right, who want to abide by the Constitution or good business practice, they're shunted. They're radicals. They're out. You know what? You can't trust them. And you can't trust them because they may do something right, which is not what you want to do. And you yourself, being a bureaucrat, may not even know it's right. But you know that if you do this, it'll make you look good. Looking good, that's all it is. Now, why do I throw the military in this particular conversation? Well, you see, the military is a bureaucracy. If, in fact, we had a true military, that means everyone in the country learned to defend this country, sort of like in Switzerland. And there wasn't, they had a very, very small standing army where people went on weekends and trained and all this other stuff, and learned the tanks and the bazookas and the rockets and all that stuff, and that would be a relatively small group, enough to protect the home in case anyone invaded, a true Department of Defense. Well, there would be there'd be no bureaucracy. It would just be a loosey-goosey a concoction of just people willing to defend what they own. A very selfish instinct, a very selfish motive. I want to protect what I own. I want to protect my family, my neighborhood, my house, my job. I have guns. There's someone out there trying to get me. I'm going to get them first. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to protect my children and my wife. There's no bureaucracy there. But whenever you have a government where they're doing something wrong, just like large corporations who do stupid things, you need a bureaucracy. Because if you sat down and thought about what you were doing, it wouldn't be right. And then you'd be telling people, you're doing something, I want you to do something wrong. Well, that's difficult to do. I mean, you can't tell someone, I want you to do something wrong, have something done, and then expect people to feel like they're part of the group. They have to feel like as if they are part of the group, but they're doing something right. How do you get a soldier? You get this young... I complain about this all the time. You get these soldiers, these young men, nice kids, and you turn them into special ops guys. Why? And then they bring them overseas to Afghanistan and other godforsaken places to kill people. They have no idea who they're killing. They don't know that person's a bad guy. He's just told, oh, he's a bad guy, kill him. That's the bureaucracy speaking. That's not the army. That's not defending America. There's a reason why they want that person killed, and they will use the army. And the stooge or the tool they use is a soldier. Now, can we then say when this person comes back, thank you for defending America? Of course not. The person's not defending America. He's defending the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is interested in one thing, wealth. And wealth comes from banking. And he's doing what he's told by the banking community. Thank you for supporting the banking cartels. Our soldiers are fighting for the banking cartels, the guys who make the money. It has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with America, with our safety, anything. trade. It has nothing to do with anything. And all the common things that we've learned, it has nothing to do with it. Look at what's happening in Syria. Smart bombs in Syria and Iraq. $1.4 million of smart bomb. Now, you have to understand what the psyche is here. You have a guy behind a computer screen, and he figures out the coordinates, presses a button, a smart bomb goes off, and then blows up in an area. He has no idea who he's killed. And not only that, and of course it's all unconstitutional, because you shouldn't kill someone unless they've had a jury of their peers pronounce them guilty. Well, you say, well, we're at war. Well, we're not at war. No one's attacked us. No one has attempted to attack us. Oh, yeah, we got the Islamic 9/11. Spare me. That was out of frustration and retaliation, and I can understand that. I condemn it, but I can understand it. So they're just killing people. They don't abide by the Constitution. Say this, well, before you kill them, shouldn't you have a jury of their peers to see if they're guilty and what they're guilty of? And is death the sentence? They say, well, we have a war. Well, we just made up a war on terror. How do you have a war on? Kill terror then. Kill terror. Why don't you just start by killing terror and then work from there? Well, you can't. He says, so that's stupid. You can't kill terror. But we use that very terminology to justify killing people. And the only way you can do that is that if you are obedient to the bureaucracy. Because the military has become a bureaucracy. We're no longer fighting wars. We're protecting those people in the United States. We're protecting their financial subsets. We're protecting the banking. We're protecting the bureaucrats, all who have their hands in it, all who are getting filthy rich from this. We are protecting the arms industry. We're protecting Boeing and the likes of those companies. And General Electric, who both, by the way, just happen to own a good portion of the media. You see, so there's all brainwashing and a bureaucracy. And we buy into it, except for this program, of course. Now, are we going to wake up? Are we going to continue to walk around thinking that, God bless America and God bless our troops? You ever notice when they say that? I'm surprised God doesn't strike them dead with lightning when they say that. God bless America and God bless our troops. And we're supposed to cheer. And then we say the Pledge of Allegiance of America. Pledge allegiance to our flag, rather. I don't want to pledge allegiance to a flag. And what's said in there, I don't believe anyway. Not that I'm anti-American, I'm fully American. I have, sometimes you just read simple stuff. Let me read you something. This is the Declaration of Independence, 1976, in Congress, July 4th, 1976. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Now, they said all men. It didn't say Americans. It didn't say you had to be living in the state of Connecticut or California. It just says all men. All men. What is it about that sentence that you do not understand? That all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their creator, whoever that may be. And that means any religion, or the lack of thereof, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. To secure your rights. That's what the purpose of the government is. There, the government just learned its purpose. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, me, you, that whatever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, them are strong words, and that's exactly what we're not doing. We're being obedient. Now, I bring that up as a prelude to a second comment that I want to make, and then we're going to go to our break. Then we're going to listen to Jim Mosquera. We make a big deal about someone breaking into the White House, and it is a big deal. I don't want to see anyone hurt, whether it be the president, vice president, anyone. I don't want to see anyone get hurt. That's not my point. I'm not saying, we should get in there and shoot the guy. I don't mean that at all. But we make a big deal about that. And look how important it is. I've heard people say, what would ever happen? What would ever happen if the president was hurt and was gone, was in the hospital, or died? What would happen to this country? Well, if you look at the way the country was designed, the president has only one job. One job. And I'll put it in very simple terms. That was to ensure that all the freedoms and the rights listed in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are not infringed upon. Period. Period. In other words, he's inconsequential. He is not really very important. Now, the bureaucracy, like I talked about before, made him important. How? He's got this war on terror. He's got the war on drugs. He's got the war on poverty. He's got the war on this and that and everything else. He's got all these, how important he is. And without him, all this would fall apart. Well, great. Fall apart, please. But even from a structural point of view, I don't see the big deal. Let's assume someone did kidnap the president. Well, we have a vice president. And what if someone kidnapped the vice president? We have Speaker of the House. In other words, we have a chain of command. Would anything change? No, nothing would change. Absolutely nothing. Our lives would not be affected one iota. Now, one thing may happen. There may be less legislation, less taxes, and we become more free. Maybe. Maybe the worse. But at least there's hope for change if that happens. But I don't see if the president disappears. If he just decided, hey, I've had enough of this, he gets in his car and he drives off and we never see him again, we would run. The bureaucracy would be all confused. Bureaucracy may even fall apart, which is great for America. We may be so bonfangled that we may withdraw all of our aircraft carriers from the Mediterranean because we don't know what to do. Even better. But we certainly wouldn't continue on the course we are on now. Folks, we got a real problem. Like I said in the beginning, I couldn't fix that bell for the Cub Scouts, and I turned it upside. And I had a friend turn it upside down. It was a brilliant guy. He looked at everything from a different angle. And that's what I try to do now. I try to look at things at different angles. When I used to work with the fully integrated oil company, I had to hold back all the time because I heard what they said. It wasn't right. It was bureaucratic. And I knew what the right answer or a more right answer would be, but I had to keep my mouth shut because I'd just get in trouble. Now, I could have been the only person right in the room, but I kept my mouth shut. And that's what's happening in Washington. Everyone's keeping their mouth shut to preserve their job. And the more they keep their mouth shut, in fact, if you fail, you get promoted. Make phenomenal money. I mean, phenomenal money. Live in luxury. Now, let's take the president. This is how important he is. Who votes him into office? The people. Well, if he's the one that's being voted into office by the people, and he's a servant, he's a public servant to the people, how important could he be? Well, just elect another person. No problem. He's not someone special. I mean, he doesn't have like special talents that no one else has. In fact, most presidents are very untalented. And those that were abused it to no end and decimated the Constitution at the same time and withdrew our rights. I'm not very interested in that. And who pays his salary? I pay his salary. He doesn't pay me anything. He does not make a dime. I pay him. And I have to be concerned that someone kidnaps him or something like that? No, we just put another person in there. There's no qualifications to be I can be president, a hell of a lot better president than we have now. I have no bureaucratic, which would be good. I could be president tomorrow and do an infinitely better job than Barack Obama and George Bush and Bill Clinton. Infinitely better job. Because I'm moral, ethical, I'm not going to bend from all this crap. I'm not interested. Not interested in the big home in Washington and all that other stuff. I would cut back our military. I mean, I would save the country. You see, the bureaucracy is afraid that if something happens to the president, it will break up the bureaucracy. Their game is ended, not ours, not America. America will be saved. The bureaucracy may go to hell in a handbasket. And maybe there'll be a silent revolution of sorts of the people. And the people will start taking over as they should have in the first place. They should never advocated their situation. But I can't understand how the president could be so important. The president is the most unimportant person in the United States. He produces nothing. He takes from the GDP. He does not add to the GDP. I add to the GDP. He does not. I pay his salary. He does not pay mine. What makes him so important? That he's negotiating with Netanyahu? Disagreeing with him, but giving him $4 billion? Unconstitutionally? Sure, I would negotiate with Netanyahu. I'd say, you shut off. You don't get a damn plane, a damn part, or nothing. And if you need some parts for your F-16s, it's going to cost you through the nose. And you're not getting another dime. Thank you very much for visiting. Now I'm busy. I got to finish my donut. You folks, you, the listeners of this program are a lot more important than the president. If something should happen to you, something would happen to your jobs. There would be a disruption. If something happened to the president, nothing. We would probably be much better off for it. Because he works for us. He's a public servant. We pay him. Why should we be so concerned about losing him? Or her, or whoever that person might be. The least important person, if we look at this thing right, we turn everything upside down, the least important person in the United States is the President of the United States. We say, oh, it's so important. It's such a difficult position. No, it's a difficult bureaucracy. It's the simplest position. Our first president had nothing to do. He used to sit in the front lawn, got bored to death. Because it was a country of people, not of bureaucrats. So I had enough of this, breaking into the White House. Now, that's stupid. I mean, the government could do nothing right. I mean, no one should be able to break into anybody else's house. No one can break into my house. I bet you I had more difficult time breaking into my house than they did breaking into the White House. Now, yeah, we should have security in the whole bit, like everybody else does. And it should be appropriate according to the size of the house and whatever. And they didn't even have that. And they spent billions of dollars on it. Just like they have done absolutely nothing right whatsoever, anytime. in any area, whether it be healthcare, whether it be defense, whether it be infrastructure or education. They have failed in every way, shape, and form. I can see our guest is holding on the air. We have to go for station identification. This is the end of the first part of the program. I'm over a minute already, but we need to get to our ads. Let's get to our intermission and ads, and we'll be with our guest in just a moment.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio with host Joe Cristiano.
Well, I'm back, folks. This is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Our toll-free number is 888-773-4496. We still have our direct number of 646-652-4620. If you want to, either number will get you to the exactly same place. On the line with us, let me get him on the line first and just confirm we have a connection here. Jim, is that you?
Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Jim. I'll give you a little introduction here, and then we'll get started. How about that?
Looking forward to it.
Okay. Our guest this morning is Jim Mosquera. He was born in Panama City. He had his formative years in Panama City. I'm sorry, what did I do wrong?
No, I said you're right. I was born in Panama City.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Formative years in Panama City and St. Louis, Missouri. Graduated at the top of his class from the University of Missouri, Columbia. He has a master's degree in industrial engineering. He wanted more. He started a comprehensive review of economics and the markets, and he now publishes the Sentinel Financial Report. His book is called Escaping Oz. Jim, we've had you on the program before. You're a fascinating guy. I'm so happy that you're back. And you had mentioned to me that you wanted to discuss something about our monetary system and maybe how it relates to gold. But I do have a question for you before we start. How did you make that transition from mechanical engineering, into the realm of economics and freedom?
Well, when I graduated from college, I went to work for a firm, like many other engineering graduates, and I kind of, like you were describing here, I kind of yearned for something more, got into commodity trading quite a bit. Really, one of my most interesting elective classes that I had in college, Joe, was actually something called money and banking. I mean, I was really fascinated by it, did really well with it. So it was kind of like a latent interest that was always there. And then, once I started commodity trading, had some success with that, then got into more what I'll call just basic macroeconomic analysis. And that's kind of what led me to, creating the Sentinel Financial Report.
Well, that's right. I recall a book when I went to college, and I'm probably older than you are. It was called Money and Banking. It was a blue book with a little black square in the middle of the cover. It said Money and Banking. And I was going to take it, and for some reason I didn't. And that's the one course. I mean, today, at my age, at 71, I would go out and I would take that course. I just regret for my entire life that I never took that course. I'm glad you took it for me, so maybe you can educate me now. Okay, Jim, how do you see things going these days?
Well, I'm sure probably some people have paid attention to what's going on to the stock market, the last couple of days. You had mentioned earlier a little bit of a discussion here about gold. I recently penned an article for an online publication called Seeking Alpha that had some pretty good viewership and contribution, I guess, by some of the readers as well. And the purpose of the article was to kind of get a broader perspective on the gold market itself. And one of the hesitations about writing an article about gold is that you might normally get branded as a gold bug.
Right.
And I'm not really a gold bug. I just look at things objectively and analytically. And, gold is one of those things that is at some point in time, it had some association with what we call money. It doesn't anymore. And so what we need to look at now is, okay, well, what happens with gold with respect to, industrial or artistic demand? But then really the thing that tends to drive the price more is what I'll call the speculative demand. And then that speculation might be related to the perceived effects of, our monetary or fiscal policy, So I went back, and the title of the article was called Golden Pictures, which I'll try to create some sort of a picture for your radio listeners. So if you go back to gold, going back to, let's say, 99, 2000, the price of gold moved in a nice little, what's called a parallel trend channel for a chart technician. And typically that tells you there's a really, really nice trend going on with respect to the price. And this price, of course, that I'm mentioning is in U.S. dollars, which is important. Then it spiked up in September of 2011. It fell below a very important, what's called support level in March, April of 2013. And then was moving in a pattern that chartists will call a contracting triangle, and that was kind of the point of my article is that once the contracting triangle finishes its movement, then you're going to head towards lower prices. And actually, since I penned that article, the prices move lower. But, the one thing I want to draw people's attentions to is that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times people suggest that, well, the price of gold has something to do with our fiscal and monetary policy. Well, if you follow monetary policy at all, you know that the Federal Reserve has obviously monetized a lot of debt over the course of the last few years, particularly since 2008. If you look at something that's called our monetary base, which is commercial bank reserves plus cash in circulation, I mean, those things have absolutely gone bananas, right, since 2008. And so if you just look at the logical perspective of some, you might say, well, shouldn't the price of gold be going up? And in fact, it hasn't. It's done actually quite the opposite. I mean, one of the charts that I show in this article is you'll see the Federal Reserve assets going almost vertical at some point, and then a pretty strong trend line after that. And then you'll see the price of gold, going up in parallel, but then, as I mentioned, right around 2013, early part, it started to fall. So if you look at something like that, if you look at like a 10-year rolling CPI, you will not see the association that people think of gold, relative to some of these other monetary events that are occurring.
That is correct. And I know because that's my interest is precious metals, hard assets, even black gold, as they say, So I'm very conscious of that, and I read that article. And I think most of anyone who is either interested in investing in gold, this would scare the heck out of you. And when you're in it, if you don't understand it, you would be very discouraged at the same time.
Right, and let's talk a little bit. So your listeners may think, okay, Jim, you've said that all these things are occurring, but why is that occurring? And I think that the point, the word, I guess, if you want to look at a six-letter word that drives all this, is something called credit. And one of the things I mentioned in my book was something called these credit cones. So when you have a bunch of credit that gets created, it finds its way somewhere. And once more credit is created, and if you have the proper psychological conditions in the market, it tends to drive speculation. And in some cases, that speculation reaches the level of what's called a bubble, a speculative bubble. Right. And so since 1982, from 1982 to say roughly 2007, 2008, we had the greatest credit creation period in the history of the world. Now, as I mentioned, that credit has to find its way somewhere. And we know that it found its way into real estate. It found its way into stocks, bonds, and precious metals. Now, at some point in time, and if you follow Austrian economics, these bubbles, these credit-infused bubbles, they tend to dissipate. And, sometimes I'll use the word dissipate, others will say burst, pop, et cetera. And when that happens, all of that fuel that was driving that bubble before is no longer there. And so one of the points that I made in the article was that some of that speculation that drove the price of gold, again, we're talking in U.S. dollars still, it was no longer there. Where you're seeing that kind of that last breath of really, really heavy speculation, still a little bit in that low-grade bond area and certainly in the stock market. So while gold has been in a little bit more of that deflationary force that has been applied to it, you're still seeing some of that, that last gasp of that credit infusion into these cones that has gone into the stock market.
Yeah, people who invest in gold or might be interested in it or follow it have got to look at this and be very discouraged. But at the same time, they have to look at what other countries are doing and what countries are doing with gold. And would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great point because, and again, the point of the article was not to decry gold's value as a potential unit of money, because we know at one point, in fact, the most important monetary agreement probably in the history of the world, called Bretton Woods, was conceived with the U.S. dollar having a relationship to gold. Without that relationship, Bretton Woods probably would not have existed. Right. Other countries right now are trying to disintermediate themselves from the U.S. dollar by not having to have that in their reserves to conduct financial exchanges, commercial exchanges. There's a coin that the Mexican government minted that was called the Libertad, which is this is really interesting because if in the United States, you have the gold eagle and the silver eagle, which those are units of currency that have some value imprinted on them by the government. So as an example, if you have a $1 silver eagle, you can go to the store and it has a currency value of $1. However, it's also 1 ounce of silver. So if you think about that for a second, would you ever use that coin to go buy $1 worth of goods? No, you wouldn't. Same way with like a gold eagle that may have an ounce of gold in it. You would never use that as a $25 or a $50 piece because it has much more intrinsic value than that. And that's a principle known as Gresham's law, where bad money drives out the good. Right. In Mexico, they've created this coin, this piece of currency that's called the Libertad, and that is going to have a value that fluctuates in price, relative to the value of gold, which is interesting because that kind of gets around that point that I made earlier that you would never go use, a $1 silver eagle to go buy yourself a soda because silver obviously is more valuable than that. Right. So there are some things that are going on with respect to maybe trying to put that currency unit, have a tighter association to a precious metal. But, the reality is this, Joe, it's very, very difficult for governments to conceive of a currency unit that would have that kind of a stricture to it that is being tied to a precious metal. Because once they do that, then it puts discipline on spending and some of the other things that can happen. And I just don't see governments having that discipline.
Right. I have a friend of my son's. He's kind of a crazy guy. He's a hell of a nice guy, but one of these guys that everything he touches blows up, But he had a job at a convenience store in a bad part of town. And I asked him, I said, why do you work there? He said, I can make some really good money there. I said, well, do they pay more because it's so dangerous? He says, oh, no. He says, they pay the same as every place else. And maybe $1 difference an hour, but not much. I said, well, what do you work there for? He says, because these young kids come in and they'll buy beer and cigarettes with precious metals. I said, well, what do you mean they're precious metals? He said, well, they steal them, from their grandfather. He says most of that money is actually family money that they steal. They know where it is. They take some money out, and they come with a load of mercury dimes or, even gold pieces, and, which has a denomination on them. And he says, they give them to me, and I just take the money. He says, I always go to work with a lot of change, and I exchange the gold for the current currency, put them in pie. He says, I've been making very good money in collecting precious metals. Isn't that a funny story?
Yeah, that's a tragic situation for those kids that are bringing in their family's wealth, right, to exchange for beer and cigarettes. As you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. But I believe him. I wouldn't make. I guess I'm not smart enough to make something like that up, and I'm not sure if he was either. But it was interesting. But you see, that's when we lose the understanding of value. It still irks me, and I play this record every week in my brain, is when Nixon made that speech saying that we are temporarily, and this word temporarily just bothers me, detaching the U.S. dollar from gold, to protect it from the speculators. I mean, no bigger lie could have been said than that. There is no bigger lie in the world. I think Connolly he directed Connolly to do that at that time. But of course, it was all a lie. It wasn't temporary, and there were no speculators.
Right. I mean, as I understand the historical aspect of that, there was one particular country, if I remember correctly, it was France, that wanted to, because they saw some of the inflationary actions of the U.S. government. That in the 1960s, of course, I mean, they were fighting a war halfway across the world. There was an expansion of the welfare society at that point in time. So naturally, the government was spending more. Other countries saw this, and since they knew that the U.S. dollar that they had in reserve was redeemable for gold per Bretton Woods, they simply wanted the U.S. to uphold by the spirit of that agreement. Nixon obviously realized what was going on and didn't want to drain the gold reserves from the United States, and so he ordered his Secretary of Treasury, John Connally, to take action.
Yeah, if any other country would have done that to us, if the reverse was true, there would have been a war. I mean, we would justify it 16 ways from Sunday, and yet this is like forgotten about. And what surprises me is that the U.S. government, the U.S. dollar, has maintained its status as a U.S. reserve currency since that time. It's been quite some time now, and it's been through some real bad stuff. And it seems to have weathered the storm until now. Now, we know that many countries are divesting themselves. I know Brazil, South Africa, India, Russia, and China have all sorts of special trade agreements outside of the petrodollar. And little do people know that many wars were started because of the petrodollar. Iran became an enemy because they decided not to take the petrodollar. That's why Iran is. Iraq became an enemy because they decided not to use exclusively the petrodollar. And if you look around the world, Gaddafi did the same thing. He was going to go with the AFRICOM and a gold bank currency for Africa. He had to go. He, all of a sudden, after 44 years or something like that of being in office, he became a bad guy overnight because he was discoupling from the dollar.
Yeah, and that of course all came about, post 1971 when the United States engaged into a treaty. I don't know if treaty is the right word, but agreements with Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing countries that it was reciprocal to value a barrel of oil in
right.
U.S. dollars. And that the United States obviously would provide, defense and other protecting agreements for those countries. Yeah. But, one thing that I think people should keep in mind about other countries divesting themselves of the dollar is that at this point in time, and to my knowledge, it's not as if what these countries are divesting themselves into on an absolute basis is a better currency. And by better currency, I mean that it's not a fiat currency, and that it has some sort of a backing to it. And again, to my knowledge right now, there's no other generally used currency in the world where they can say that it's not a fiat currency. And so if you divest yourself from one fiat currency into another fiat currency, again, for the purposes of that particular currency, you really haven't gained anything. And so that's one thing I'd like to point out to people is while the U.S. dollar certainly has its flaws, it's not as if there's a better option out there right now. And, I've been to many foreign countries where, if you take a U.S. dollar, it's very readily accepted. Right. And even in preference to their own home currency.
Yeah. I read an article that when after the Nixon speech, the decoupling from the dollar, people in Europe who had dollars, merchants stopped taking it. People in Italy, for example, could not pay for a cup of coffee with $1. Huh. It took some time. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I didn't think anything like that happened. They said, but everyone got the word real quick that the dollar wasn't acceptable anymore, and everyone they didn't know what to do.
And the interesting thing about money is that the definition of money has really undergone some pretty radical changes. Let me give you a quick definition of money from Webster's Dictionary in 1968, and it said that money was standard pieces of gold, silver, copper, nickel, etc., stamped by government authority and used as a medium of exchange and a measure of value. And if you look up the definition of money now, It'll say something generally accepted as a medium of exchange, a measure of value, and a means of payment. It doesn't say really what it is. It just says how it's used.
Right.
And ultimately, money that people use, the currency, really comes down to what people have confidence in. And as long as there's confidence in, that piece of paper or that piece of, quasi-metal that you have in your pocket, you can still conduct commercial transactions. It's at the point where that confidence is lost, again, irrespective of what causes that confidence loss. But when that confidence is lost, that's when you get into these panics and you see things that happen in other countries where you have hyperinflationary periods because nobody wants to hold on to that money because nobody has confidence in it anymore.
Right.
And at this point in time, I mean, if you track, and I've actually been in some investments since late spring that are favorable relative to a rise in the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar has done really, really well over the course of the last 2 to 3 months. Again, doesn't mean that the U.S. dollar is going to be necessarily the standard bearer currency to the position it once had, but I just really want to emphasize to people that once you have all this credit circulating around in the economy, it tends to find its way into cones of investment. And, the dollar in and of itself, again, is a speculative investment. The exchange-traded funds and the futures markets and so forth. So, sometimes we have to kind of separate ourselves from some of the things that we consider logical, particularly with regards to currency.
Yeah. What do you think of Jim Rickards in his book, The Death of Money, where in the latter part of his book he postulates that the U.S. will lose its status as the world's reserve currency, and he believes that will happen in the next couple of years. Replacing it will be SDRs backed by gold, and that would be the new international medium of exchange. But this would not happen until Russia has a little bit more time, and China has more time. No, not so much Russia. I'm sorry. China, he mentioned China, has more time in shoring up the amount of gold that they have, or they're admitting to have, and that was 2.7% of their GDP in gold. Now, they believe that they have more than excess of that, but China doesn't count all the gold that they mine themselves and stash away, that sort of doesn't exist. And there is speculation that, China may have proportionally more gold than the United States relative to their GDP, only because they've been mining it for years and then storing it and not reporting it. They just report that stuff that they purchase through, Hong Kong and Shanghai and stuff like that. So, what's your thought about an SDR similar to what Jim Rickards is advocating?
So an SDR, and I believe it even exists now, something called a special drawing right. At one point in time, and again, don't quote me on this, but I believe an SDR was composed of like a basket of currencies.
Right.
So that basket of currencies meant something, but that special drawing right wasn't really used. It hasn't been used as, let's say, just a unit of currency that people use for commercial transaction. I think it was used maybe in things related to the IMF and loans that got made among countries. Again, I'm not real sure about that, but if you have a currency unit and if it's an SDR, and let's say that becomes somewhat analogous to what you had with Bretton Woods, that has some sort of a gold backing to it, that would not be a bad thing. Again, once that happens, however, it imposes a certain stricture on governments in terms of what they can do. In the case of the United States, something like that would probably have some pretty significant consequences because some of the things that we do as a country, because we've been given, let's just use the term, a free pass since 1971, probably won't exist anymore. The question becomes, though, is if you create these SDR-associated currency units, what happens? Does that mean that it's something that occurs what was pre-1971, which was when you're within the United States and you have a dollar or whatever the currency is, would you be able to go to a bank and exchange it for some hard metal? My guess is probably not.
Right.
But but the exchange rates then between currencies would be more fixed, kind of like what you had, again, pre-1971. Right. Pre-1971, a dollar was said to be worth, let's say 5 German marks or 7 Italian lira, and that stayed in place because everything had a relationship then to the dollar.
Right.
Now, of course, currencies fluctuate. Again, back to that concept of credit and cones of investment. So if something like that does come about, I think it's definitely going to have some strong fiscal implications for the United States.
Yeah, he estimates that the value of gold against the SDR, which is which is issued by the IMF, International Monetary Fund, would be in the vicinity of $9,000 an ounce.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, some different valuations where, if you just look at the amount of credit outstanding relative to the amount of gold that, that would exist, let's say, in a particular country, I mean, you would see valuations even higher than that, if that's the relationship that got established. But again, I think the important thing, and I haven't read his book, is if you're talking about that in terms of an international currency exchange, that means one thing. If you're talking about, a true unit of currency that you would use within your own country that would then have readily exchangeable value with precious metal, which, again, I don't see that happening anytime real soon.
Right.
That's an entirely different matter.
Yeah, well, Jim, we have run out of time, believe it or not. We have about 1 minute and 17 seconds left before the lines go blank. I'd like to leave the next minute for you to tell inform our listeners who you are and what you can provide and what they should do.
Well, as you mentioned in the intro, the Sentinel.biz is a website that I have that focuses more on, macroeconomic analysis, things that are going on in the economy, like, interest rates, certainly the stock market. We talked about gold today. My other business is called SentinelConsulting.biz, and it's a business restructuring firm. One of the engines, or perhaps the main engine of economic growth in this country is small businesses, but right. Small businesses, they run into economic problems on their own. Could be just circumstances that occur in the small business owner's personal life, could be the economy, macroeconomic effects as a whole, could be some adverse business conditions. So what I do is I help them out through debt mediation and capital acquisition. Many times by the time I'm working with the client, they are already involved in some sort of civil litigation, so we try to help them out through that. So a lot of that stuff, Joe, that occurs on a daily basis that I see here in St. Louis, Missouri, but certainly all across the country, and that's what Sentinel Consulting does.
Okay, Jim, we just ran out of time. We sucked up all the minutes on the clock, okay? we still have a line. I want to thank you so much for being on our program this morning. It's been very enlightening, very interesting, and I hope you do accept our invitation to return at a later date.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe, and I'd love to be on again.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Boy, that was great.
Political talk derived from a historical perspective.
Okay. This is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. Folks, you can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friend and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. With that, until next time, I'm Joe Cristiano. This is Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.